Okay, let's have a look at how we'd go about shimming a diff. So here's just a standard plastic case Traxxas diff, just out of the Erevo, like what most of you would start off with. So what we're actually trying to accomplish here by shimming the diff is to remove our play out of it. So the play that we can find is in our input shaft. As you can see, we've got a little bit of movement. It will move in and out. It's probably a bit hard to see, but you can definitely see there's some movement there. And the next thing that we've got is play between the gears. Once again, there's not a real lot there. It's fairly tight, this one, to begin with, but it's all play that we don't want. So another part that gives us problem is under, say, braking conditions. The input shaft might actually push in, which if we turn it while pushing in, we can hear the mesh is terrible. That's the sort of thing that we want to avoid, and shimming will allow us to eliminate that problem. So let's have another little look. So here's a ring and pinion. So the way that we can actually adjust our gear mesh is we can move our pinion in and out depending on where we put shims, and the same deal with our ring gear. We can move that out and in as well. So basically we want to get the mesh as tight as possible, but that's still smooth. If we have it too tight, it'll be notchy. If we have it too loose, and it's sloppy. So we just want a nice happy medium. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pull the diff apart, and we'll have a look at where we actually place some shims to eliminate this movement. So we'll just remove the top half of the case. Okay, so here's our gears. So what we can do, the first thing that we'll look at is how much play that we have with our crown wheel. This one actually feels pretty tight here, but it will vary depending on diffs. Especially once the diff's actually been running for a while and it's run in, you'll quite often find there's a bit more slop in it. So it doesn't actually feel too bad there. I would normally start off by putting a shim in between our crown and our outer bearing. That way this will effectively push the crown wheel closer into mesh, as opposed to if we put the shim on this side, it'll move the crown wheel out of mesh. So what we'll do is we'll just pop it out. We'll just take the bearing off. It'll be a bit slippery. Okay, there it is. So what we can do is we can actually put a shim around here, which on this side of the diff will need to be an 8mm shim. So I've got my shim sitting just beside me. I'll grab out a small 8mm shim. Okay, so most of the shims come in different sizes. The way that we identify them is the inner diameter of the shim. So this will be an 8mm shim, and then the thickness of the shims. Typically they come in kits of say 0.1, 0.2 and 0.3. So this one here, by the looks of it, is about a 0.2. So what we'll do is we'll drop him on there, and put our bearing back on. So effectively we've moved our crown wheel 0.2 of a millimetre closer into mesh, or eliminated 0.2mm of play side to side with the crown wheel. So that should still drop back in, which it does. So that 0.2 was fine. So the next piece that we've got to look at, I would typically go through and make sure that there's no movement whatsoever in the crown side to side. Once I'm happy with that, then I'll go on and start looking at the pinion, which I think that's pretty good now, so we'll move on to the pinion. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove my little dry cup here. Okay, and we'll just push the pinion out. Right, so here's our pinion. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add 6mm shim onto here to try and push the pinion gear closer into mesh as well. So basically we want to move the pinion as far into mesh as what we can so that it's still nice. Okay, so here's a 0.2 by the looks of it once again. So I think we're going to want to add another one in here. Okay, and here's also another 0.2 by the looks of it. So let's give that a try. So that's 0.4 of a millimetre that we've moved. The pinion gear. So let's drop the crown wheel back in again. So what I'll do next is I'll just put the other half of the diff case back on. We'll drop the screws back in. Little tip while we're here, it's pretty easy to eventually strip out the plastic threads in any of these plastic components. So normally what I like to do is I'll just apply a little bit of pressure onto the bolt, turn it backwards nice and gently, and you should actually feel it line up with the previous threads right there. So once we screw that back in, so instead of effectively cutting a new thread, we'll go into the existing one that was there. So once again, a little light pressure, and we could even hear it that time. Pull them up. Once again, we don't want to go too tight, otherwise we will strip the plastic. Rightio. So what we're going to do now is we will drop our drive cup back on. So let's turn and have a look at our mesh. Right, so what we found here is it's way too notchy. So that quite often happens because we had a little look at our mesh without our cover back on, so we didn't have all the components seated quite properly. So what I'm going to do is I'll go back through, I'll remove one shim, and we'll recheck it. This one there. So let's remove one. So as you can see, it's pretty tight tolerances what we're playing with here. We found 0.4 of a millimetre was too much. Let's drop it back to the 0.2, and we'll reassemble it and try it again. So sometimes you might have to do this 3 or 4 times just to get that mesh just right. Isn't feeling too bad now, but we've still got the issue of our pinion gear can actually float in and out. So once again, if we push into it on it, we can hear that's a terrible mesh. So that's the next thing that we're going to address. So what we're going to do is we'll pull our drive cup back off again. And what we're going to do this time is we're going to add our shims on the outside. So basically we just want to take up any gap that there is between our drive cup and our bearing. So there's a 0.3. We'll grab our 0.2 again, so that's half a millimetre. So if we drop our drive cup back on, if we look down, it's a bit hard to see on camera there, but we can still see that there's a bit of a gap. So we probably still want a good another half a millimetre. So there's another, looks like about a 0.2 to me. That'll be a 0.1. So as we can see, nope, still need more. So 3. And we're starting to get a bit closer now. We might just drop our screw back in just to check. So we stuck a little bit there, nothing too much. There's another 0.2. So basically I aim for just nice and snug. So the screw went in a bit easy, so I want just a little bit more. It's not too bad there. So that's how we'd shim the diff. So if we are to check our play now, we should find that we have none, which that's just what we want. No more play. So we've moved both our gears into a nicer mesh. What most people would do from here would be to say grab a cordless drill, actually connect it onto one of the output shafts on the diff, and spin the diff up for a couple of minutes. But it'll just allow the gears to break in a little bit. And after that, we can check our mesh. If it's all good, we're ready to put it back into the car. But obviously, before breaking the gears in, we would want to grease all the gears up first. So we would want to add grease to both our crown and pinion. Obviously there's still grease on here. This was just a standard diff that I had laying around that's been in my spares box for probably a couple of years now, as I've never needed to use it, because I've upgraded my diffs to let's call them a nice heavy duty variation of these. So some of the upgrades that we can look at. Replacing our plastic diff cup with a nice aluminium diff cup. So obviously that'll allow just to get rid of the bit of flex that we have in the plastic, just to try and lock everything down a bit nicer. So that's one upgrade we can do. Another upgrade we can do is throw away our plastic diff case. So we can go from a plastic to, once again, a nice aluminium diff case. This one here is actually one that I modify. I've opened up both the bearings to accept a larger bearing, to replace the standard 12x4 bearing with a 13x5 bearing. So just that bit stronger and definitely lasts longer. The next upgrade that we can look at is, of course, our ring and pinion. As you can see, this ring gear has seen better days. It's fairly chewed up and pretty sad. So obviously it's not a serviceable part, so I'm just using it here for a bit of a demonstration. So that's the next thing that we can replace. We can go from our standard Traxxas ring and pinion to something like this. Just ignore the spool. This is a hardened steel gear set made by GPM. So they're a very nice little upgrade. If you are looking at buying the GPM hardened diff gears, don't buy just the ring gear on its own. They do sell it on its own, but it's not compatible with the standard Traxxas pinion gear. I've tried, it's a terrible mesh regardless what you do, as the tooth profile is different between the two gears. It'll be a bit hard to see on the video here, I'm sure, but as you can see, the Traxxas gears are a lot more rounded. as opposed to the GPM gears are a squarer cut on the tooth profile. So the shimming procedure is identical whether you're using a spool or a normal diff cup arrangement. As you can see here, here's another alloy diff case, or diff cup I should say. So the principle is exactly the same. So I hope this clears up a few questions that some people might have had. I will be doing another video shortly of where I'm going to actually do a full assembly of my modified diff cases with my lem diff cups, which I should have in about a week, and we'll also use the GPM hardened gear set and the oversized Avid bearings. So I'll be doing that video in the next little while, and we can see what you all think of that.